this is like literally your last chance. Like I feel like I'm in a bad relationship, Kevin, where it's like they screwed up and I was like, okay, this is your last chance. Then they screwed up again against West Virginia. Okay, that was your last chance.
But she said she's changed.
Then they lose against TCU. That was your last chance. No, I'm telling you, this is your last chance to turn the season around. It has to be now. It has to be against Arizona State. Thanks for listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank. If you're thinking about starting a business or know someone who is, check out Emprise Bank's SBA loans. It's always good to know your options, and they can be your partner in possible. Paid all who enter. Beware this podcast. That's right. This is the paid podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, and I'm here with my guy, Kevin Flaherty. And if you're watching on YouTube, I've got a new crib. That's right. I've got a new setup. I'm chilling. Kevin, what do you think? What do you think of the setup? It's pretty sick.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Did you do that yourself?
Yeah, I bought this all. Yeah, I went out. I bought it all. It's all mine. No, I'm just kidding. I'm at the KCSN offices here. So we got a nice little office setup. But yeah, doing some work from the office here. So hopping on the show here from the office if you're watching on YouTube. And if you're watching on YouTube, you should be subscribed. If you aren't, hit the subscribe button and also like the video as well. And if you are listening on the audio platform, you can also subscribe to us on YouTube also for more content as well over at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. We are brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. And Kevin, it's another game week for Kansas against Arizona State on the road. This is an interesting game that I am looking forward to, which may seem surprising because K's 1-4. But Kansas is going to be playing in the heat. They're going to be playing against a team that was predicted to be one of the worst teams in the conference to start the year, but they're surprisingly 3-1. The downside, though, Arizona State's coming off of a bye, so they are going to be fresh and ready to get back to work after a loss against Texas Tech. So it's going to be a tough game for Kansas. We're going to be talking about that more later on in the show. But first, I want to start off with, I think, what a lot of people are interested in right now is that's the coaching situation for Kansas, which is Jeff Grimes, the offensive coordinator, and what to do about that, what some of Lance Leipold's comments were. So I wanted to dive right into it first with this on Monday. Lance Leipold was asked, not specifically about Jeff Grimes, but sort of in a roundabout way of like, hey, are you looking to make any sort of changes? Are you looking into making any sort of personnel, in a vague way to sort of, in an open-ended way, so much, by some of the media to sort of see what Lance would say. And to my surprise, and I think to many people's surprise, he basically said, I don't know what you mean. Which, listen, the better response in that situation would just be, I believe in my guys, I believe in our staff, whatever, blah, 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 blah. Right? Like, it is one thing to basically ignore a outside, media story, really. It's another thing to then do that even further, to go for even further and say, straight to the faces of your fans, of, the media, of, I don't know what you're talking about. There's no problem. You are 1-4. The offense has objectively been up and down pretty bad. It's not all Jeff Grimes. Obviously, I've actually been a defender of Jeff Grimes early in the year, so it's not all his fault, but like at some point you maybe do have to consider making some sort of change, right? And I mentioned this on our postgame show. I don't think it's realistic for KU to fire Jeff Grimes at this point. He's 5 games in the contract he signed. I don't think KU would be able to buy him out, essentially, to get rid of him. And again, he's only 5 games in. So I'm still willing to give him some slack. But at the end of the day, you can't, as the head coach of this program, just completely ignore or pretend to have your head in the sand on an issue that is being widely talked about surrounding your program after one of the most disappointing starts you've had in program history at this point. So I was a little frustrated by that. I don't know. How did you feel about the handling of that, Kevin?
I thought Lance was being a little sly when he said it, on rewatch. It wasn't necessarily, I don't know what you mean. I think it was more, you need to come out and say specifically what you're calling for here in order for me to answer it. And he'll do that sometimes. When you look at, when people have asked him about, officiating calls, and they'll say some questionable calls, and he'll say, well, questionable or bad? He'll make the reporter basically say, well, this one was a bad or whatever. And so I think there was a little bit of that. Certainly the press conference was very short, Nick, and you had a better read on the atmosphere than I did because I wasn't there for that one. But that was kind of the way that I took it. I mean, I think he knows what people are talking about, but I think he wants the reporter. He's not going to help the reporter out in that situation. He's going to make the reporter say, have you considered demoting Jeff Grimes? Have you considered a change at quarterback? Have you considered, this, that, or the other? And I think that was probably more where he was coming from. But at the same time, Leipold has joked a couple times at different press conferences, like, I'm not going to give you guys anything viral to, based on what I'm saying. And I think the way that he said that, everybody kind of circled that, put exclamation points next to it. And that was going to be the takeaway that people came away from that with.
Yeah, I don't know, man. Like, it still rubs me the wrong way, though. Like, you can't just you can't just act totally oblivious to, something that a lot of people around the program, a lot of people obviously on the outside and the media are talking about, which is the offense has not lived up to the billing. That's one of the few changes you have from this team compared to last year is a new offensive coordinator in Jeff Grimes. Jeff Grimes on Wednesday talked about, the melding of the systems and something that kind of bothers me about that too is, listen, you can talk about melding systems all you want in fall camp and in, the preseason. That process needs to be completed by the time you kick off your first game. Okay. You're 5 games into the season. Like, there shouldn't be any more issue with the melding of whatever you're trying to do, of whatever you're trying to bring in versus whatever KU has already established and what you want to run. Like, that process need to have been completed long before 5 games into the season or 6 games into the season. So that was a bit, and then listen, Jeff Grimes talked about that in the preseason, and that's fine. At that point, I was like, listen, I get it. You showed up, right? Whatever. You're trying to figure out what you want to develop, what you want to utilize that from your own philosophy versus what KU's done successfully previously. I get all that. But you're 5 games into the season. You're almost halfway through the season, and you're still having the issue melding those systems together. That's a problem. That's either you are not adjusting to what KU did well, or you are trying too much to take your own philosophy and applying it to KU, and it's not working. Like, there's an obvious disconnect there, and the fact that it's taken you almost half the season now to still try to meld them together, whatever, that's an issue. Come on, what are we doing? Figure it out. You had the whole off season, you had fall camp. That's all fine if you're still trying to figure that stuff out then, but the bullets are flying. You are 1-4. That stuff needs to be figured out, needs to have already been figured out. And that really raised my eyebrows, I think, when I heard him say that again in this context, because it's one thing in the preseason. It's another thing when you're halfway through the year and you're still having that issue.
In fairness, I think that they probably did some things right in the preseason that they haven't been doing on Saturdays. And I'll give some specific examples. I think judging on the first few games, wouldn't you say KU thought they could throw the bubble screen? Like that, they could block it. They thought they could block it. And when he called those, there isn't necessarily a bad bubble screen that KU has called from a numbers standpoint, where you've got enough blockers out there to block the guys. He didn't block those guys. And so I think there are some things like that you learn a little bit as you go. I think specifically, and this is going to come across as harsh, the receivers haven't played very well, Nick. And talking to Jeff Grimes all preseason, he was excited for this group of receivers. They're guys that have been really good in the past and played a lot of football. You know what you had there, or you thought you did. But you and I have talked about this. How often does KU throw kind of that little 50-50 ball to the boundary? And you say, hey, it's one-on-one coverage. I'm going to give this guy a chance to go make a play. And I'm not saying that Jalen always throws it perfectly or anything like that. But how often has a receiver made that one-on-one play to make it a 50-50? Because it feels like they're about 1 for 30 on those. And certain guys are struggling that I don't think they thought would struggle, or are struggling in different ways than maybe they thought they would struggle. We talked earlier, Jalen this last week didn't have an interception until the very end of the game, and then he was pressing. He did a better job of taking care of the football, but we've talked about the fact that 2 of his interceptions came on late seam throws where he had the seam and he threw it too late. That's something that I bet in practice they were having success with. And it's something that when you look at the past, Jalen has thrown seams really well. And so a lot of that's getting really into the weeds, but I think that's where the meld continues to happen. And I think to his comments, basically, we've seen the offense change over the course of the season, right? You aren't seeing jet sweeps anymore. You aren't really seeing the bubble screens. You're seeing some different concepts and seeing more of certain concepts. You didn't really see much speed option to start, and you're still not seeing it a ton, but you're seeing it more than you did. And so I do think they're still, for better or worse, in this feeling out process. And I'm right there with you. I mean, ideally, you would have that figured out before you suited up for the first game. I do think that there were some things that they thought they'd be able to do that came off in practice, didn't come off in games. And so they're in the process of still adjusting to, okay, this seems like it would work. It's not working. Let's throw that thing in the trash and let's try this other thing as well. And so he talked about having a big playbook to start the season, and then you narrow it down from there, and specifically narrow it by opponent, obviously, because certain things are going to work versus different teams. But I really do think that they're in the process of narrowing down not just things that'll work against different teams, but also throwing out some stuff that maybe he would like to run, that theoretically they should be able to run, that they aren't being able to run.
Yeah, and listen, I guess that's the tricky part. It's like, if Jeff Grimes says, hey, I have this play call that I think is going to work, or that in theory, I think will work, and KU can't execute it on the field, who's to blame in that scenario, right? Like, is it a bad play call, or is it bad execution, right? And there's obviously both of those issues coming up for Kansas on a lot of different plays that they try to run in a lot of different scenarios. So going back to what you mentioned about the receivers, look, I don't think it's harsh at all to say the receivers have been bad. I think it's just the truth. I mean, besides Luke Grimm, and we know how great of a connection he has with Jalen Daniels, those two seem to be on, for the most part, the same page. But even Luke Grimm has missed a couple of passes from Jalen Daniels as well. But yeah, Lawrence Arnold and Quentin Skinner specifically have both been bad. Like, there's no other way to put it, I don't think. I think they've just been bad. Lawrence Arnold has had some uncharacteristic drops. Quentin Skinner obviously had the deep ball against TCU that he couldn't make the catch on, and he hasn't really been very effective either. So, yeah, I mean, you look at what should be really probably one of the bigger strengths of your team in terms of a room overall with the wide receivers, with those three veteran guys, and it hasn't been the case at all to start the year. And, that probably adds to, the issues that Jalen's had to start the year, obviously, right? Because his receivers haven't been maybe as sharp, and the connection hasn't really been there as well either. So, but again, my big thing is, and I'm going to keep saying this, if Jalen Daniels is going to be ineffective or not, as effective as we think he can be as a passer, utilize his legs. Like, just, to me, like, I'm not trying to simplify it too much, because I know, it's easy to do that, to fall into that trap of simplifying something too much. But to me, it's as simple as, if Jalen's not going to be effective as a thrower, or, be really somebody that's going to scare opposing defenses as a thrower, run it. Run the option, run read option, run speed option, get Daniel Hishaw and Devin Hill in there, and run it with those two plus Jalen Daniels. Like, to me, that would be the first thing I would try to do, I think, right? And we've seen a little bit more of that, obviously, but I would lean into it even more so at this point, because if Jalen Daniels is going to be bad as a passer, or he's going to be ineffective, he's going to turn the ball over, whatever, and on top of that, you're not going to utilize his legs, then at that point, that is where you lose me. That is where I start to think, okay, well, if that's the case, then yeah, maybe let's throw Cole Ballard out there, or let's throw Isaiah Marshall out there and see what they can do. Because if Jalen Daniels is going to be bad as a passer, and on top of that, you're not going to utilize his legs, what are we doing at that point with him, right? Like, if he's not getting any better, then at that point, that's where I think you start to consider trying something different from a personnel standpoint, right? Like, that's just one example. I like I said, I don't. And even as I say that, I'll talk out of both sides of my mouth here. Even as I say that, on the flip side, I'm still not convinced that Cole Ballard would be any better, and I'm not convinced that Isaiah Marshall would be any better either. And I think the argument with Isaiah Marshall then becomes, on one hand, okay, yes, you would like to get him maybe some experience if you're quote unquote punting on this season essentially and giving up basically. You want to get Isaiah Marshall some experience, but also, Kevin, you can speak to this. If you bring Isaiah Marshall in there and he struggles, you could break him mentally, and he may not be able to recover in terms of going into the future, right? So it's a double-edged sword of hey, let's get this young freshman some experience. But if he goes out there and gets rattled and gets, and plays poorly, he might mentally be broken then for the future. Then you've ruined everything.
Well, and the other side of it, and I kind of smirked when you were talking about it. If you're going to bring in Isaiah Marshall, what's the best thing that Isaiah Marshall does? It's
run the ball.
And so if you're not going to use Jalen Daniels' legs, like why would you then put in Isaiah Marshall? And so I think there are some of those things as well. And I 100% agree with you. I think an area where Kansas could, potentially make a little bit of a shift and find some success is running a more varied option attack, like what you saw with Andy Kotelnicki. And I think that really opened up a lot of Andy Kotelnicki's passing concepts, was the fact that everybody was so worried about, oh my gosh, this receiver's orbit motioning. Are they going to run, option to the wide receiver? And then there's a guy sneaking right behind you for a 15-yard crossing route. And so I think that's an area where the Jeff Grimes hire was kind of interesting in that he likes running a lot of wide zone. Lance Leipold's Buffalo staff like running a lot of wide zone. And so I get the fit from that perspective. But what it kind of made them special at Kansas was the fact that they were running this stuff that nobody else in the Big 12 was from an option standpoint, from what you were looking at, and then them running the option standpoint into all of that. And so as nice as it is to see the odd speed option out there, Nick, I think an area, throw in some power option, throw in some counter option, throw in some more read game type stuff where you're doing different things, like you said, to take advantage of Jalen's legs. But also, I think some of that stuff, you have passing concepts off of that could help ease some of the burden on those guys getting open as well. And so I think that's one area where the Jeff Grimes hire, to me, was kind of interesting, was he's not necessarily a big varied option guy. There's not a huge option package that he has there. And yet you look at this offense, and I think that one of the things that these guys have played a lot of football together, Nick, and one of the things that they've been most successful with has been running that sort of attack. And so how do you mesh kind of all of those different things? And that, quite frankly, that was part of the reason that I asked, Jeff Grimes the question I did about melding, saying, hey, you've got this stuff you want to run. They've got stuff they've already ran here. Then you've got something in the middle, which is the players are good or bad at running this stuff. How does that whole process shape together?
Yeah, and again, that process, to me, needs to be figured out, or at least much more further along by the start of the season than what it has been, than what we've seen so far. And listen, what you just mentioned with the passing off of the option, I immediately thought of the long touchdown against Iowa State last year where Jason Bean's running a speed option, and then he throws it over the top to Lawrence Arnold, and it's an 80-yard touchdown. So that's the first thing. Okay, there you go. Let's implement some of that. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here. But yeah, it's and all of that is, comes to a head on top of that with the fact that KU sitting at 1-4, and we'll dive more into this after the break, but just to sort of tease that thought out, like KU sitting at 1-4, obviously at this point, the season even really feels lost. But if there was ever one sort of iota of hope to maybe, turn things around, it's Arizona State, because they are a team that was picked to finish in the bottom of the Big 12. This is like literally your last chance. Like I feel like I'm in a bad relationship, Kevin, where it's like they screwed up and I was like, okay, this is your last chance. Then they screwed up again against West Virginia. Okay, that was your last chance.
But she said she's changed.
Then they lose against TCU. That was your last chance. No, I'm telling you, this is your last chance to turn the season around. It has to be now. It has to be against Arizona State. And we're going to talk about that and more coming up on the other side. As always, though, look, win or lose, you can look good with some home field apparel. That's right. Head to homefieldapparel.com. They've got over 40 different Kansas items. They've got everything you could want. Listen, the temperature today in the Kansas City area was in the 60s and the 50s overnight. I opened my window. Oh, Kevin, I slept like a baby. It was great. And I slept well because I knew I had great home field apparel I could throw on in the morning, along with my Jayhawk joggers I talked about. You can get a hoodie as well for the fall weather also. So you can find all that and more over at homefieldapparel.com. Use the promo code PAY24, 15% off your first order at homefieldapparel.com. And we are back in just a moment. Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your number one source Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
With big wireless providers, what you see is never what you get. Somewhere between the store and your first month's bill, the price you thought you were paying magically skyrockets. With Mint Mobile, you'll never have to worry about gotchas ever again. When Mint Mobile says $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan, they mean it. Say bye-bye to your overpriced wireless plans, jaw-dropping monthly bills, and unexpected overages. Mint Mobile is here to rescue you with premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Use your own phone in any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with your existing contacts with you. Ditch overpriced wireless with Mint Mobile's deal and get 3 months of premium wireless service for $15 a month. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/payheed. That's mintmobile.com/payheed. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/payheed. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details.
This is the Paying Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer. I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. Don't forget, if you're listening, be sure to leave us a 5-star rating and review. Tell your friends, tell the internet, tell the world about us. You can also find us on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, drop a comment at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN over on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe, like there as well if you're enjoying the show. And spread the word about it. Spread the word. As I said, I think to end our postgame show against TCU, rain or shine, win or lose, hell or high water, we will be here. We'll be talking KU football. And speaking of KU football, Kevin, like I said before the break, taking on Arizona State, this KU's 1-4, and I think for a lot of fans, the season already feels lost. The season already feels over. If there was ever a chance to turn it around to where you could feel like this team even just has a chance to make a bowl game, this feels like the opportunity to do it. This feels like the time to do it. You're playing on the road against an Arizona State team that, again, was one of the bottom teams in the Big 12 in the preseason. They started off the season pretty hot, though. They started 3-0 in non-conference play, and they played a close-ish game against Texas Tech before losing. They are coming off a bye, though, which means this is going to be a well-rested team. They were dealing with quite a bit of injuries, actually, but they're almost fully healthy. They've got a couple guys on their defense that are still going to be out, I think, for the rest of the year on the D-line and the secondary, but this is going to be a real challenge for Kansas, and not to mention all of that, it's going to be like 110 degrees in Tempe when they kick off on Saturday afternoon. So what are you making of this game for KU? Do you think if KU wins this game, they can still find a way to salvage the season? Do you think is the season over if they lose? Where are you sitting on for this one against Arizona State?
Yeah, I think you can salvage quite a bit, and I think that's part of the reason that this game is so important. And I agree with you on this. And we talk all the time. Coaches refuse to say a game is a must-win game because, hey, if you lose, what are you going to say the next week? But you have a bye week after this one, and then you have Houston, and Houston's got a pretty depleted roster, Nick. They're probably the worst team in the Big 12 from these are the guys that they put on the field. I'm a huge Willie Fritz guy. You know that. I've wanted him to get the Kansas job in the past. I think he's going to do great things at Houston, but this year, his first year there, they're pretty depleted. And so I think if you lose this one, you go into the bye, you beat Houston, then you go to Manhattan, the confidence level is not necessarily going to be real great because it's like, well, we beat Houston, which we should do. Whereas I think if you go on the road, beat Arizona State, enter that bye week with some positive momentum, then beat Houston where you got a 2-game winning streak heading into Manhattan and the harder sort of last part of that schedule, I think you're tracking more in the right direction. And we've talked about this before, Nick. This team just needs to have something good happen to them. I really do think that a lot of their issues are almost like mental block type stuff. It's the kid in T-ball that, for whatever reason, is missed hitting the ball like 3 times. And so he's going to his mom just like, I can't hit that thing. It's like, you can. It's still sitting on. It's not going anywhere. But they need to see it come off the bat really well in order to maybe take that next step. And I think it feels like a team that when things are close at the end of games, whether they would admit it or not, maybe they feel like the other shoe could potentially drop. And Brian Borland told us, I think it was it a week ago, that he said he used the word uptight. We've got guys that in game deciding situations right now, they're pretty uptight. And so I think it's a must-win game for that reason too, Nick, just in that I think that this is a team that could use a shot of confidence quite a bit. And whether they go to Tempe and win this one, 45-3, and it's like, oh my gosh, there's the KU team we all expected to see, or they win on like a butt fumble or something like that. They just need to have something go their way where they can enter that bye week with some positive momentum and have a chance potentially to start a streak with that Houston game coming up after it too.
Yeah, I mean, look, setting aside the coaching stuff that we talked about, like, this is the same team. So really the only other answer for their struggles is the mental side, right?
Yeah.
Because you've got all the same players. Like, they're really, there's no real injuries. There's no catastrophic injuries. There's no, again, outside of the change on the offensive coordinator side, there wasn't really any other real significant personnel changes, right? You lost a couple of guys on your defense at the linebacker position. You lost your starting center in Nowitzki, but all of your skill position guys, all of your main talent is back on this team. So if it's not, the coaching stuff setting aside, like on the field, then it must be a confidence thing. It must be a mental thing. And yeah, that stuff can snowball very, very quickly. And obviously I think it has for Kansas to this point in the season. And yeah, it gets to the point where you expect the other shoe to drop, right? It's not even like a situation where you're waiting for it. You just expect it to happen. And guess what? When you're expecting something to happen like that in the game, and you have that mentality of like, oh my gosh, something's going to happen. Guess what? Something probably is going to happen, okay? Because you have that mentality. So they've got to find a way to break that. I mentioned this earlier in the week with Lance Leipold. Like, man, Monday was the most dejected I think I've ever seen Lance Leipold. He was down in the dumps, and that really worries me because if that's what Lance Leipold is like, I can't imagine how that trickles down to the locker room. So I think a lot of it does start with Lance Leipold to find a way to sort of recapture that spark of energy, whatever KU needs. And I'm a little worried about that being the case, kind of based off of how he was when we saw him for the brief amount of time we did on Monday. But yeah, that's it's got to start somewhere with Kansas. It's got to start with a spark somewhere. Maybe going on the road. Sometimes in a weird way, Kevin, I'll throw this out there, like in a situation like this, just going on the road, especially against not a very good team in Arizona State, like a team that's 3-1, but a team that was not projected to be very good. Does going on the road almost help versus having to play a team at home? Because, I mean, let's face it, against TCU, the Boo Birds were out at times, right? And on the road, you don't have to deal with that as you're the road team. So I don't know. I'm just throwing stuff at the wall here, trying to figure out what could change to get KU going in a game like this against Arizona State.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that can help. And that's not to say that KU fans didn't do a really good job of supporting them.
Oh, KU fans
obviously they showed up great, and when they were playing well, they were really loud too. But I also think, a change of setting going into that place, a lot of teams adopt that whole mentality of when we go on the road, it's us against the world. And that can kind of help a little bit too. And as weird as it sounds, you hear a lot of coaches talk about the fact that their players like going on the road. They like the chance to play spoiler and go to a different atmosphere and be in that situation. And so it's interesting because I actually think, probably KU's best game, I would say, at least from an offensive standpoint. And I realized that, there was the big break in between. It was on the road at West Virginia. And that was a game that they were up 11 and it had a chance to win, and they didn't wind up pulling it off. But generally speaking, they did what they were supposed to do up to that point. And so I do think that there is something to going on the road and maybe having an advantage there. Kind of a little note that we talked about before we got on here that I thought was really interesting. We talked to Michael Ford today, and one of the things he said, you brought up the temperature. It's supposed to be in Tempe. Obviously, it is not like that here right now. And so he said that the team today practiced in the indoor with the temperature ramped up to 100 degrees. So they're doing things to try and simulate that temperature, because if they practiced outside today, they would not be getting prepared to play in that level of heat that they're going to see out there.
Yeah, listen, 100 degrees inside, that's criminal. I mean, that is criminal. Like, dude, you would never catch me going to one of those stupid, like, hot yoga sauna stuff. Like,
that air is just sitting there, like the hot air. It's not moving. No. There's no breeze. It's just, yeah.
Dude, I sweat when it's 70 degrees outside. What makes you think I want to go and sweat in a 100-degree whatever the hell? No, hard pass from me. No, listen, if I were a player, I would be pissed, honestly, about that. I'd be like, this sucks, man. Like, this is terrible. Like, I understand, obviously, from the practicality standpoint, you're trying to prepare us for Arizona State or Tempe, but that is brutal. I'm glad that I was not in the indoor practice facility when they were doing that.
Yeah, for sure. And it's one of, they usually like to make it, of course, just about every team, they'll play the opposing team, they'll play crowd noise and the opposing team's fight song really loud and all the things to kind of have them get ready for those situations as well. But I did find that interesting that was basically the way they said, hey, it's going to be really hot on Saturday. You know what else is going to be really hot today? The football facility. We are the indoor facility. We are ramping that thing up, and that air is not going anywhere, and you are going to lose about 30 pounds over the course of this thing. Shout out Katie O'Connor. She's going to earn her work after that practice in terms of getting guys' weight back up and making sure everybody is hydrated and taking care of themselves.
So as I said, Arizona State, they're 3-1. They were unanimously picked to be one of the bottom two teams in the conference in the preseason. In their non-conference, they picked up 3 wins. They had a win over Mississippi State, a close win over Texas State as well. And then they went into conference play against Texas Tech, lost in a game in which they came back. They hung with Texas Tech a little bit. They were down, I think, 15 or 16 late in the game, and kind of came back and made it a little bit closer. Ended up losing 30-22 in that one against Texas Tech. Now have a bye week, and this is noteworthy. It's Arizona State's Big 12 opener ever. It's not even like their Big 12 season opener. They're just their Big 12 opener for being in the Big 12. This will be their first time playing at home. And obviously Kenny Dillingham, the new head coach for Arizona State, came from San Jose State, trying to rebuild up the program. This is a team, Kevin, that I think has a lot of talent on it. They've got quite a bit of power forward transfers that have come into the program. But it feels like maybe they're a couple years away from being more of a legit team. But this is a game that you can't take lightly, certainly, on the road against Arizona State. When you look at their offense, it's Cam Skattebo, I think, is how you say it. Skattebo, their running back, is probably their most dynamic player. They've got Sam Levitt, the quarterback, a transfer from Michigan State, who kind of leads the offense. But it's definitely more of the run game. And also Skattebo out of the backfield as well is probably their most effective way to play on offense. And the defense is interesting. Jeff Grimes talked about how they're fast and aggressive on defense, and it'll be a challenge, I think, for Kansas regardless. But what's kind of your view on Arizona State, maybe where Kansas can try to take advantage and maybe on both sides of the ball, offensively try to score some points, defensively try to figure things out? Because Brian Borland had said they're pretty close. What do they need to do maybe to fully get there against Arizona State?
Yeah, I think when you look at that offensive line that Arizona State has, everybody talked about Colorado basically hitting the reset button with their offensive line group, through the transfer portal, and then bringing Jordan Seaton from the high school ranks. And Arizona State just about restarted their offensive line through the transfer portal. Obviously, things are a little bit different. They're not being in year 2 and just basically throwing away the guys here and bringing these guys in. But similar in that they probably upgraded their line from a talent standpoint from what it was, but those guys haven't necessarily had a ton of time together. And when you look at like Texas Tech, for instance, who they played in the Big 12, although not in Big 12 play, if I remember right.
It wasn't that one of those. It was the same as
I think that was one of the weird like non-con type things. I could be wrong on that, but no, that was a conference game.
Okay. Yeah, they got it as a conference game, looks like. Yeah.
So with that one, Texas Tech didn't really rush the quarterback. And, they've got 3 down linemen. They basically try to set things up and then play the guys behind. And so I'm interested to see how that line holds up. Obviously, Kansas has done a really nice job slowing down the run game, particularly with the defensive tackles. Can Kansas get pressure in some different areas? Jamie Brown has emerged as a really nice additional pass rusher off the blitz that they can send guys there. I think, you could see more DJ Warner this week and some things designed to get those 4 guys home when Jamie Brown isn't coming. Scadaboo is an interesting back, Nick, because so far this season, he's basically having somewhat of a similar year to Devin Neal. And I'm not saying that they're the same or anything like that, but he's kind of similar in that he can make guys miss. He's got great contact balance. He gets a lot of yards after initial contact. And so he really helps them out a lot. Sam Leavitt is a pretty good runner, too. He's been one of the better running quarterbacks in the Big 12 so far.
Which, fire alarm, that's bad. That's bad.
And so I think Kansas, coming off the TCU game where you said, oh my gosh, they threw the ball all over the place, Hoover never runs, and they picked the secondary apart. I think in this one, it's going to be back to be careful with your rush lanes. Don't get out of position because they can hurt you in some of those different areas. I think Jordan Tyson's a good wide receiver, was at Colorado before coming over. You mentioned just the sheer number of power conference transfers that they landed. Feels like half of them played at Texas.
Yeah, I got a lot of Texas guys, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's kind of funny to watch from that standpoint. Defensively, I feel like they're more a big play defense than a consistent defense. And so you want to take care of the football. You want to try and get into situations where you're not having negative plays. I think this would be a good game for Kansas. Arizona State's been really good against the run so far. They've been one of the Big 12's better defenses against the run. And so I think it's going to be more of a consistently executing type thing if Kansas is going to move the ball in this one.
Yeah, I think turnovers are going to be absolutely critical. As you said, Arizona State's defense is opportunistic. They've made some plays. They forced some turnovers this season. And obviously, Kansas's offense has been more than willing to give the ball away at times over the course of the start of this season. So you got to find a way to take care of the ball, I think, if you're Kansas and not turn it over against this Arizona State defense. That's going to be very, very important, I think. And yeah, I would love to see Kansas, Kevin, just put together a drive, right? Like, just put together a drive at this point. Like, you had joked last week before the TCU game, like, I'd said, oh, we'll try to get a ball eligible, and you were like, just win a game. Forget just winning a game. Just put together a drive, man.
We're gonna keep cutting
this drive.
We're gonna cut this thing down until it's going to be the process where it's going to say, just have a successful play. Just have a successful play. And so, it's obviously coaches and players have to look at it that way. The most important down is the next one. But, as fans and media members, we can look at it and say, look, like, put a drive together. And I'll add, Nick, too, Kansas has had some success and kind of a check mark in Grimes' favor. Kansas has had success on scripted drives early in the game. And so when you look at that, they've had way more issues later on into the game as they've had to continue to execute from that point. And so maybe an addendum to your thing would be just put together a drive in the second half, or, once you're off the script. And so I do think this is a chance, Nick, to be, and we've said this, it feels like every week, but it does have a chance to be a get-right game from not just hey, you won a game again, but also a confidence standpoint and, a consistency standpoint. And so I think there are going to be opportunities there for them to take them. It's up to them to actually do it now.
Well, something else to consider on that point for Arizona State is, Kevin, you look at the rest of Arizona State's schedule, they don't really have very many more opportunities for wins on their schedule. After Kansas, they play Utah. Then they go at Cincinnati, which looks like, okay, maybe they might have a chance. Then at Oklahoma State.
Cincinnati's been a lot better, though.
That's exactly. And then at Oklahoma State, and then UCF at home. Then they go at K-State. They play BYU. They finish the year in Arizona. So if you look at Arizona State's schedule, there are not really very many more opportunities for a win for Arizona State. So I think from the Arizona State perspective, they're looking at this game saying, this could be a season-defining game for us. Like, we're sitting at 3-1. We started 3-0. We dropped the first conference game. We have a really tough schedule down the stretch, but if we find a way to win this one, maybe that'll help us build some confidence into some of these tougher games and find a way to get to a bowl game, which is really, I think, at the end of the day, what Arizona State's trying to do. They had lower expectations for the year. Obviously, they've been 3-9 the past 2 seasons, but yeah, I think I'm almost expecting Arizona State to come into this game with some extra juice, because you look down the rest of their schedule, they don't really have very many more games where you can say, oh, okay, they can win that one compared to this game against Kansas. So, and I don't think they're going to be taking Kansas lightly either. That's the other thing about this is, like, Kansas, they were ranked in the preseason. Like, this is still a team that I think a lot of other teams are going to be very much respecting, regardless of the record and regardless of how the season has gone for KU. So they're not going to get anybody still on the, not on their toes, essentially, basically, which could be a real challenge as well. So that's something else to consider for Arizona State. Is I think they could potentially come into this game with some extra juice because of the fact that they may recognize, hey, we don't have very many more chances for real clear-cut wins. We've got a really struggling Kansas team that has a little confidence. We need to take advantage of this opportunity, pound Kansas into the sand even more, and get a win at home to start our first home win at the Big 12 level. So that's something else that I'm considering as well in this game.
Yeah, I would agree with that a ton. And you look at Arizona State's last 3 games. I mean, they came out in the opener and just smashed Wyoming. But since that point, all their games have been really close. I mean, you had the Mississippi State game that they won by 7. Then you go at Texas State, you win by 3. You go at Texas Tech, you lose by 8. And so each of their last 3 games have been decided by a single score. In each of those, they've had between 22 and 31 points. In each of those, their opponents have pretty much been in that same range. And so I think it's really I hate to call it a statement game, but it really is a game that for both Arizona State and Kansas, we could look back a month from now and say, hey, remember that game? That game was really integral either in a positive way or a negative way for the way the rest of their season played out.
Yeah, look, at Unnamed Sportsbook, no free ads. An Unnamed Sportsbook, KU is 3-point underdogs. Typically, if you're at home in college football, that gives you 3 points. So Vegas is basically saying, hey, on a neutral site, this is an even game. And that's kind of what I'm expecting to happen in this game. You just rattled off the numbers on what Arizona State's done so far this season. I'm expecting this to be another one-score game. And I talked about it after the TCU game, which is that gives me simultaneous confidence and also a lot of concern, because Kansas has been in a number of one-score games, 4 of them to be exact. I know the TCU game ended up not being a one-score game, but for a majority of the game, it basically was, right?
Sure.
Against TCU. So KU's been in essentially 4 straight games that have been, decided by one possession or been within one possession, essentially. And what's their record? They're 0-4. So they have not proven that they can win in one-possession games or in close games. And I don't see anything that indicates to me that this is not going to be another close game for Kansas. Like, you mentioned it with Arizona State playing in close games. I expect this to probably be a close game again. I think Kansas has way too much talent to get blown out by a team like Arizona State, and really by any team they have left on their schedule. So that means they're going to be in these types of games.
Yep.
The question just becomes, can they get over the hump? Can they turn the page and find a way to win a game like this going away, right? And that's where I turn to Devin Neal. Devin Neal is the heart and soul of this team at this point. You got to find a way to give him the ball late in the game. You got to find a way to have him activated late. And I think if you have Daniel Highshaw, that hopefully can keep Devin Neal fresh late in the game to get in the ball, because at this point, I mentioned it again after the TCU game, with Jalen Daniels late in the TCU game, there was just no juice. There was no, everyone in the stadium knew that KU was not going to score when they got the ball back late in the game. And guess what? They didn't score. You got to get the ball to Devin Neal, I think, late in the game, especially if it's a close game. I expect this to be a close game. I don't know. I picked against Kansas last week in the hopes of, reverse psychologying my way into a Kansas win. And that didn't work. So I don't know what to do this week for KU against Arizona State. I mean, like I said, I want to believe that KU can find a way to win a one-score game. I mean, it's almost one of those things where it's like, eventually you think they would, but also if you just keep pounding your head against the brick wall doesn't eventually break. You know what breaks? Your head. And that's where Kansas might be at right now, where they're just going to keep losing these one-score games. So I don't know. I'm having a really tough time parsing out how I think this game might unfold for KU.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in that it's probably a one-score game. Something I would like to see a little more of that Jeff Grimes talked about in the preseason, and I think you're going to be exactly on the same page here, is I'd like to see some more Devin Neal and Daniel Highshaw on the field at the same time. I
Yes.
think, whether you're running Wildcat and they're next to each other, or just, hey, on either side of Jalen and let defenses figure that thing out. I think you've got two really good running backs. I think as much as you'd like to get out there and show, that you can play with 4 tight ends like they did against Lindenwood, or 3 or 4 wide receivers, I think the running game is kind of where your advantage is, and getting both of those guys on the field at the same time, I think gives you the opportunity to do some things. I'm not saying that's going to come out this week, but that's something that we've seen, again, these little tweaks from week to week from Jeff Grimes. That would be something that I think would be interesting to watch this week is the tweak. Hey, Daniel Highshaw, led Kansas in rushing last game, and that's not a knock on Devin Neal. Devin played really well too, but let's get this guy on the field more along with Devin Neal and make defenses try and figure this thing out.
No, that actually has befuddled me to this point in the season, because it's been a common thread of what Jeff Grimes has talked about, of saying, hey, I want to get these guys on the field at the same time. And obviously, Highshaw dealt with an injury, but for whatever reason, that philosophy hasn't really come to fruition yet on the field. Well, again, you are 1-4. Now is the time. If you had any sort of break in case of emergency, like anything, like formations, play calls, anything like that, now is the time to do it. Do it now. Like you have to do any of that you have up your sleeve. If you were saving something for later in the season, whatever, it's too late for that. You got to use it right now.
Yeah. The whole break glass in case of it's an emergency. Break the glass, and so especially with having the bye week after this thing, empty the clip.
100%.
Do exactly what you can to get across the finish line in this one. Figure out the rest later. There's no use saving a play for later. Empty out the bag now and see what you can do, because I really do think, Nick, that this game is about as close. And again, we've said this, multiple weeks in a row, but I really do think that there is a point of no return, right? There's a point where you just don't have enough opportunities to kind of get back and salvage this season. I think if you don't get across the finish line in this one, we're having to talk about, like, hey, did you hit the point of no return on this season? I know that they'll continue to work it and all of those things after that, but I'm just saying, do you have enough opportunities to achieve, kind of what you want to achieve, where you're not looking back at this year and saying, oh my gosh, that was an awful season. I think that this is one of the last kind of remaining chances to flip that switch.
Oh, absolutely agree, 100%. And if KU does drop this game, it's going to be a very interesting, basically 13 days in between their bye week and the next game against Houston, right? There's going to have to be some very serious conversation. Like Lance Leipold is not going to be able to come out and say, well, I don't know what you mean if they lose this game against Arizona State. There needs to be some accountability. Probably, I think for a lot of fans, they already feel that way now, but if there was ever a time where KU was going to make a change, the bye week would make the most sense. If they lose this game against Arizona State, I think is probably where then you almost have to make a change. And again, I mentioned this, it's KU stuck between a rock and a hard place, because you lose this game against Arizona State, any change you can make is probably too little too late to really even legitimately make a difference for the trajectory of the season. But it's to the point where you'll feel like you have to make a change, right? I mean, you have to make a change at that point. So that's kind of where they're at. And obviously, hopefully they can just find a way to win against Arizona State, and we can maybe, stem the tide on some of that conversation. Go ahead, Kevin.
Oh no, I was going to say you're absolutely right, and maybe the changes wouldn't even be like something that we're necessarily consider. I know everybody's got one or two that they have circled where it's I think play caller or make a change at quarterback, but I would be very interested to see if Kansas looks internally during that time period, if either those aren't the changes they make, or if there are other changes in addition to one or both of those two changes as well, because I do think that the struggles have kind of permeated multiple spots. And so if Kansas really takes a step back and kind of audits this thing, I would be interested to see what the results of said audit would be.
Oh yeah. Listen, if you lose this game against Arizona State, everything should be on the table, I think. I mean, seriously, everything. It shouldn't just be one or two changes. It shouldn't just be potentially the quarterback or offensive coordinator or whatever. It should be, there needs to be like you said, audit's the right term. There needs to be a full, in-depth review of everybody within this program and figure out what changes can be made that, again, maybe not necessarily even changes the results of some of the games this season, but just doesn't completely destroy everything that you've been working so hard to build over the last 3 years. And that to me is where I'm kind of a little bit surprised. I don't know if surprise is the right term, but with Lance Leipold's demeanor a little bit, like, to think about how hard he specifically has worked to build what Kansas has built over the last 3 years, and then to see him just so dejected at this point, like show some fight, man. Like, fight back. Like, you helped build this. You helped turn this around. Like, Kansas fans want a statue for you, or they did want a statue for you. Like, you are the reason we're even in this situation to begin with, of having this discussion about, falling off in the rebuild. Like, that this is all because of you. Like, you've done great over the last 3 years. Fight back, push back, fight for what you've built so far.
Yeah. And I think, right now that fighting is going on behind closed doors, but I also agree with you in that there's value to projecting that too, right? To coming at it and showing that fight in public instances and pushing back on some of that stuff. Like you said, even if your answer isn't, well, I don't know what you mean, and instead, like, look, like, I get that you guys, but you are wrong. Like, this is why I hired the guy. This is why I turned this thing around, and hit it, hit it that way, as opposed to, being kind of coy with it. And so I do think that at times there is some value in aggression. And I'm not saying that at times it doesn't get mistaken for testiness or whatever, but I do think that, teams take after their coach a lot. And I think you see this across multiple sports. I think one of the reasons that Kansas is so good in close games under Bill Self is you look at Bill Self in the huddle with 2 minutes left, and that dude looks like he's been tanning all game. Like, I mean, he does not look upset. He doesn't look worried. He doesn't look like, I'm terrified of what's going to happen. No, he projects a calm, confident front that, hey, like, it's a 2-point, like, that's nothing. We're going to win this game. And I think, projecting that image a lot of times is just as important, or maybe not just as important, but it's pretty important in the grand scheme of things, because your players do notice if you're nervous, if you're worried about this, if you're worried about that. That's something players can take after. One of the reasons that Bob Stoops was called Big Game Bob for quite a while was they played well in big games, in part because Bob Stoops, you'd see him in the tunnel before a game and he looked like he was going to get a manicure. Like, it did not look like he was terrified for what was going to happen out on the field. I'm not saying Lance is looking terrified. I'm just saying, hey, if you think this is the right hire and you're right around the corner, put both your feet to the ground, say it with your whole chest, and project that. And
show some fire, but not toward the refs. Redirect some of that energy from the refs to everything else. Okay, forget about the refs, man. Forget about the refs. Redirect some of that energy. Listen.
Take it out on Swain. Take it out on Swain.
Listen, you go to therapy and it's redirect. Channel the energy. Channel the energy in the right way. Listen, you should channel your energy to the KCSN mobile hotline powered by Mint Mobile at 913-407-6524 to share your thoughts. You can also leave a comment on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. Drop a comment there. And also hit us up on the KCSN Mint Mobile Hotline to share your thoughts as KU heads to hot Tempe, Arizona this weekend on Saturday. We are going to be doing another live postgame. The live postgames have been going pretty well. Thanks so much, everybody that's been tuning in for those. If you want to join in with us for a live postgame show, you can on Saturday night. With a 7 o'clock kick, we will probably be trying to go live within 30 minutes after the end of the game. So looking at probably around 10:30 on Saturday night Central Time. You can join us on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. You can subscribe so you get notified when we're going live, and come and join in on the comments live on Saturday night after KU takes on Arizona State. And of course, you'll be able to listen on the audio platforms as well after that also. So that's the plan. We'll be back live on Saturday night after KU Arizona State, and I may need a drink or about 100, or maybe I'll need a drink or 100 positively, right? Listen, let's keep it positive. I just realized, Kevin, we didn't make any game picks. I don't know if you want to make a pick here quickly before we get out of here on how you think this game's going to go.
I have no idea. And I mean, I'll make a pick because we should make a pick, but I want to put that out up front because I do think that Kansas has a chance to be better than Arizona State. I think the talent is there. I think Kansas plays like it did against West Virginia in building the 11-point lead. This is a game that Kansas is probably going to win. And yet at the same time, the fact that I think it's going to be close in a one-score game, and we've seen the way that those have gone for Kansas of late, there's a lot of reasons to like Arizona State in that situation. I don't think Arizona State's going to run away and hide in this one. I don't think they're going to blow Kansas out. I think when you look at what they want to do in terms of holding on to the ball, the passing is designed to give them, some easier completions. And even so, Leavitt hasn't been extremely accurate. And so this isn't going to be a game that I don't think Kansas is going to get just absolutely derailed by giving up big plays against the Arizona State offense. And especially if they play assignment sound against the run and Scatterboo. And so I do think if I'm required by law to make a game pick,
you are required by law.
I'm just here so I don't get fined. Then I think I'll pick Kansas to win it because I do think that's in them. I think, Nick, quite frankly, we've talked about it. The TCU game, I think, is the only game this season where Kansas just got outplayed. And looking back, yes, the score was close and they were in it in the fourth quarter, and it was 28-27, for a while in the fourth quarter. And even after that, you're still within 8 for a while in the fourth quarter. Even with all of that, TCU outplayed Kansas. In the other games, though, Nick, Kansas had every chance and in a lot of cases was favored by a significant amount to win those games, and it didn't happen. I tend to think that they will get there in this one. I think Arizona State's been living dangerously with some of those close wins and games that could have gone the other way, and I think it winds up biting them this week.
I think I am back to my old ways with Kansas, and here's what I mean by that. You got to prove it to me. You got to prove it. Like, I haven't seen it yet. I said earlier I think this will be a close game, and I do stand by that. But you got to prove to me that you can win close games if you're Kansas. So for the second straight week, I'm going to pick Arizona, or I guess not Arizona State for the second. I'm going to pick against Kansas for the second straight week. I'm going to pick Arizona State. I'll even give it a score. I'll say 27-21. Arizona State wins. Prove it. Prove to me that you can win a close game, Kansas. Prove it. And hopefully my reverse psychology actually works this week. So other than that, that's about it for us here on the Paid Podcast. Like I said, we're going to be live for a post-game show on Saturday night after KU and Arizona State on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. Be sure to subscribe so you get notified that we're going live, and come join us and hang out there with other great KU fans. Thanks so much to all the KU fans that have been with us for those previous live post games, and hope to see you again on Saturday. Until then, he's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. Talk to you again soon. See ya.